Now that's more like it. Let's review The Nun 2. The Nun 2 stars Thaisa Farmiga, Jonas Bloquet, and is directed by Michael Chavez. What's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new 2023 review. We're going to review The Nun 2. I went into this with the lowest of low expectations. Setting the table, was not a fan of the first Nun. I just thought that movie depended way too much on cheap jump scares, but also just the visual effects, way too much CGI, and just those two elements together. I just thought there was little in the way of creativity. All right. So again, went into this one just thinking probably going to be more of the same. I'm a casual fan of the Conjuring Universe as it is. You know, I don't think any of the movies except maybe the first one really knocked my socks off. I do really like the first one, okay? And I think I've reviewed every movie in the Conjuring franchise, you know? I mean, I'll always be there day one because horror YouTuber, it's always good to review new, dyed-in-the-wool horror movies. And you would consider this like the big Hollywood upper scale echelon of horror. Upper scale, not in quality, but just in production, you know, they have quite a substantial production budget. But before we get into the pros and cons, let me give you a quick plot synopsis. Sister Irene is back, and more importantly, Valek is back. How did she return in this one? It doesn't matter because they all, you know, it's a sequel. That's how she returned in this one. You got to make money, right? I think the first one made a pretty good bit of money, so let's find a way to bring her back. And the way they bring her back, I think, is believable. Because, she's a demon, right? And hell, they always find a way to bring a demon back. And it's usually faith-based. If you have faith, you can fight it. But if you lose your faith, it can always come back, right? So we can always buy that premise, right? But she comes back. There is this boarding school. That's where most of this movie takes place, this boarding school in France. A couple of different locations in this movie. Opens up in Paris. That's where we first see Valek. Since the beginning of the movie, I can tell you that there is this priest, that Valek has this, not much of a showdown. I mean, she's going to win that war, right? It's a good opening to the movie. And I was expecting it to be, more of one of these just Valek hiding in the shadows somewhere and then a quick jump scare and then we get her titles. But no, it actually opts for a little bit of creativity, a little bit of shock value, and it starts off with a nice bang. At this boarding school, there is this chapel, and it's closed off because of this relic that has been left there. There's a story of this Saint Lucy, and she was killed. They tried to burn her, but the legend goes you can't burn her. So yeah, they took her eyes, and her eyes are extremely valuable. And Valek needs those eyes. And I won't go any further in terms of the plot, but that's just kind of your basic setup, okay? Now, obviously, there are going to be different characters shifting around throughout this movie. We need victims for Valek, right? And there's plenty of them in here, actually. Now, we have a returning character, Maurice, who is a pivotal part of this movie. I'm not going to really tell you too much about Maurice. Just know that he's very important to the story. And there's this mother-daughter duo. You got Kate, played by Anna Popplewell, and her daughter is Sophie, played by Caitlin Rose Downey. And these are two pretty pivotal characters to the story, especially Sophie. Sophie is one of the students. Kate, her mother, is one of the teachers. But there's these bullies. It seems like all these horror movies have to have a group of bullies, right? And these bullies, they chase Sophie into the chapel where the danger is, right? And she sees in the window this mysterious figure, this goat, which ties into the story as well. We know when we talk about religion and goats, it doesn't take much to put together that there's probably an evil connection there. So yeah, that's your basic story, right? She's back. We got to figure out how to fight her, get rid of her. But let's jump into the pros and cons of this review. And I will say right now, I was shocked coming out of this movie at how entertaining it was. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But man, it's nice when you go into a movie not liking the first one at all, and then this one is actually so good that it kind of makes you want to go back and maybe check out the first one. Because, Maurice, the character Maurice was in the first movie, right? So there's a character connection there. And he is a pretty important character to this movie. But also in terms of the violence, the scares, the kills, that's what we all go to these nun movies for, right? Brass tacks. They're effective. And more importantly, they're very creative. I think they had an entire playbook of scares to use. Do they all work? No, I don't think they all work. There are some cliche scares here and there. But thankfully, I never knew which direction they were going to go because they had so many different ways that they wanted to scare the audience. You can tell that a lot of preparation went into this movie. Got to commend Michael Chavez, who his previous movies haven't really, knocked it out of the park for me anyway. He did Curse of La Llorona. He did the last Conjuring movie. Both those movies wasn't the biggest fan of. But I think in this movie, he's really coming into his own. I think it's propped up by a much better and bigger story. I'd even say the final act of this movie is pretty damn epic. But in terms of the scares too, and how they always keep you guessing, there's like moments where, Valek is a spirit and you can pretty much do anything with this character. You'll have moments where just the presence of her will be in the shadows, on this like stone wall. And then she could just, be moving across the screen really quick. There's scenes where she's violent and there's blood. One of the scares early on in the movie, this character just gets like slammed up against this wall and then you just see blood like pouring. And I was like, oh, that's pretty refreshing for a Valek movie. And don't worry, I'm not giving away too much. There's actually quite a few scares in this. A word on Taissa Farmiga. It's interesting that her sister plays in the Conjuring movies and she plays in this. And you always wonder, because this, I think, takes place like 25 years before the events of The Conjuring. Maybe the two will tie in eventually. I'm not going to say if there's a connection there in this movie, but that thought's always in your mind. And you even wonder, like, is this character supposed to be related to the Warrens, even though the Warrens were real people, That's where it gets kind of weird with this franchise too, because you're dealing with reality, but you're also dealing with a lot of fiction. But the character Irene is really coming into her own in this franchise. She's earned a little bit of credibility because she was in the first movie. And so we're depending on her in this movie to really do the heavy lifting. And she does. Now, as far as any cons, I will say, I guess the first half is where I was maybe a little bit worried that this movie was going to be kind of just mediocre. And I will say, last night I saw Haunting in Venice. I got to record my review for that. Whew, that was rough. Okay, that I'm not going to go into a complete review here on that, but let me just say this was pretty damn refreshing, and I left like I had a full meal, a full horror meal. And like I alluded to, yeah, not all the scares work. There's going to be a couple times where you can kind of predict what's going to happen, or you might not be able to predict it, but it's not as effective as you would like it to be. That's the fun thing about these movies too, is you can kind of form in your own mind before the actual scare happens. Ooh, I'm hoping that they do something like this. And I'd say half the time they do what you want, and then half the time they don't do what you want, Or more importantly, it's just not as effective as it should be. But luckily, I think there's a lot more creativity in the kills and the scares, and really just the story in this movie. It feels bigger than the first movie. The visual effects are much better in this. I think there's a good mix of CGI and practical effects. And honestly, I couldn't even tell which is which half the time. And that's a good thing, You don't have to think about that stuff. You can just kind of enjoy the story. Valek looks much better in this movie than she did in the first movie as well. And lastly, if I could jump back over to the pros a little bit, because I did forget to mention this, but I will say, don't depend on just Valek to be doing the scares in this movie. There are other ways that this movie scares you outside of just Valek. Okay, that's all I'll say. Really cool stuff, though. Might even lean into the creature feature department at times. So, guys, I can't believe this. I'm going to give it a low purchase worthy. And I did not expect much, but it turned out to be quite fun. But I can also say this, I have no idea what other reviewers are going to say about this movie. I haven't looked into any of the reviews, and I'm curious. I'm really curious if a lot of other reviewers are feeling the same way I do about this movie. There could be others that say this is horrible. It's just one of those movies. I don't know. But I can tell you right now, I dug it. I had a good time with it. So yeah, definitely check it out if you get a chance, all right? That's my recommendation. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays we do Free for All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums and on my socials. Support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee. And you guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Drumdum out. What did you do?
descending in